emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
I see we have a question in the chat. Okay. He was the first one to come in, Abbas. He was standing, his picture showed him standing next to a white van. Someone just sent me a message, was asking about him. Okay, very well. He's with us. Abbas, could you open your microphone and introduce yourself? Someone is requesting. Mr. Abbas? He may be away from his microphone. Okay. Let's give him a second call. Mr. Abbas, can you hear me? We'd like you to introduce yourself to us and tell us where you're from. He may be working and listening. I do that often. I'm not always able to come to the microphone. Again, welcome Alex from Canada. Thank you so much for your service to the community here and to the universal community and sharing knowledge with us.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Sorry for the technical glitch earlier, but this is a presentation of the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute. And as you can see, we have a lot of members on the Keshe Foundation TV network, and that will definitely be increasing very, very rapidly. The overall goal of the foundation is peace. And peace, the destination for peace is where science meets the soul of man. And is that possible? And why are we taking so long to get to know this? So it puts a burden on us as teachers. And last week we came to a termination point, and today we're moving on to a new level. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute, teachings on plasma science. We're going to be beginning a new series today called Basic Knowing. And the first subject is physics. And my name is Alexander. It is September 19th, 2021. I am from Canada, but this is part of the Keshe Foundation North American Plasma Education Series. Those who have been following the pattern, we know that last year, it's almost been a full year now, we began the basic teaching. And in that, we had to learn terminologies, which is pretty fundamental. If you don't have the language, you can't discuss about it. But a lot of people came to the foundation because of cups of life and the pandemic and all the baggage that comes with it. And we decided to go into some intermediate and advanced teaching to get a taste of what's to come. But that was all part of the basic teaching. And so we decided to move into a new level, the basic understanding. As I said, we just completed that last week with the advanced understanding. But even the intermediate understanding and advanced understanding is still part of the basic understanding. And so how do we move ahead? And so we're coming to a discussion, the basics of knowing. And it's very important to take advantage of everything that we've discussed because when we review these subjects, as you see on the schedule here, our perspective is going to change radically. But another there's another problem that is going on here. So as today we're going to be discussing physics, and we want to get away from the basic physics, but you know what? If you go into the professional leagues, you don't want to forget what you learned in the minor leagues. And in fact, some of the things that you learned in the minor leagues, you have a different perspective of now because it fits differently. And we've come to a serious problem here because regardless of how many millions are following this technology, there are many more millions who've never heard of this. And in their case, they are basically going to sleep at night, shall we say, very disconcerted. And the teaching has to move forward. We have a deadline, and Mr. Kesh has moved ahead extremely rapidly. And he is on a different platform. Well, how do we catch up? Can we catch up? And how, if we're starting today, how do we go over thousands of hours teaching and condense that into a few hours? So one of the tricks that I learned is how to bridge this gap, and how to bridge this gap very quickly. And so not only for the mature students, but particularly for the new students, you have to go through the basic teaching and basic understanding to know where we are at today. But we don't have access to the research. We don't have access to the real advanced technology. So somehow, some way, we have to make this connection. And that connection comes from the basic knowing. And what the basic knowing is the interpretation of the terminology. So when we discussed terminology in the beginning, it was basically in three categories. So we know that a charge is energy in motion. So everything we discussed about magnetical gravitational relationships worked with respect to energy in motion. But the fascination of the whole project is that this is a natural plasma. This is a natural science, and it is as natural as being born. And hello, we really don't understand how we are born. And if we don't understand how we're born, then we really don't understand how we die or why we die. And so everything around us is based on our physicality. But we see that we are capable of going through different geometries, different dimensions. And so we've had some rules that we've picked up along the way. And one of these rules was surface to volume ratio, which is a very physical thing. And then it described susceptibility. And of course, the big jump to the nanostate is to introduce the difference between our atomic physics and now our monatomic physics. And whether it's atomic, which atomic atom is uncut. And so atomic means an uncut particle. And so if it's monatomic, it's a single atomic uncut particle. And we now can go through different energy levels. And the speed that we go through, we determine as a gradient. And in plasma science, we refer to that as dynamism. Well, Mr. Cash in his teachings now is going at a very rapid pace. In fact, much more accelerated. And how do we keep up? So one of the ways we have to keep up is we have to accelerate as well. So our learning has to be accelerated also, and ideally by an order of magnitude. But, you know, when we look at physics the way it is today, physics as a science, and it's a noble science, and it's fundamental, but it has limitations. Well, you see, those limitations impact our soul. So in fact, they extend to our soul limitations. So the knowledge that we gain is the purpose to eliminate these limitations. And the only way that we can do that is, first of all, to recognize them that they are in place, because we are not rocket scientists. In fact, you know, many of us don't even have enough of an education to discuss this subject. So how can we know? Well, we have an advantage. We were all born. We all have bodies, and we have a soul of the body, and we have a soul, and that soul is connected to something. And that connection is giving us the transformation, and transformation to our body. And from our body, it allows us to transport ourselves around this planet. Well, we have new opportunities coming where we can extend this knowledge to outer space. So we said we're all living in a little yellow submarine, but the problem with our yellow submarine is it's in the physical sea of green. And this physical thing is based on inertia, and that inertia is the interaction of the force fields of the sun and the earth. Whoa, wait a second. So there's more. There's more. Oh, so that's the point. This is how we build dimensions. We get one point, say like the sun, we add another, like the earth, it's another point, and we connect the two. So this is how we build things. And so when we look at bridges and what the bridges are supposed to do, that's what they do. They take us from one point to another. Or we can say it takes us from here to there. You know, this sounds pretty elementary, but, you know, we went from basic terminology to basic understanding. Okay, so introduction to the words and concepts, to understanding what the words mean and the concepts, what they mean, because you have to use the right terminology in the right context. And the way our society, the way our media, the way our education is, there's a lot of double talk. And I'm going to do a lot of double talking today, you see, because what is the difference between understanding and knowing? So if you understand what you're talking about, then that gives you a basis for knowing. And is the knowing the details? Well, you can go through the details if you have the time. But if you don't have the time, then you have to acquire this knowledge somehow. What is the connection to that knowledge? So that connection is knowing. You see that. Say you get a litter of cats, kittens. Mama cat dies. How do the kittens learn to endure in their physicality? Who teaches them? Because mama is not there. And of course, dad's nowhere to be found, right? But the point is, these kittens have some kind of connection of knowing what to do and to build up their life skills without a physical teacher. So what we're trying to do now is to bridge these details. So not get back down to the details, but if we bridge to this knowledge through the connection of knowing, then we can keep up with Mr. Kesh in his classes, you see, because where we're bogged down is the physicality. Everything around us is a physical manifestation. And this is the key point that we're going to talk about today. Why is this physical manifestation here? And why is it so restrictive? And why are we stuck in it? Because we like it, because we can touch it and we can see it. But the plasma state is kind of mystical because we can't touch it and can't see it. But you know that you can sense it. So when you sense something, such as love, for instance, why should that be so mystical? So we set up a bunch of rules, and these rules we kind of put together by understanding what exactly is manifestation. And so we find that when we compare the definition of manifestation to, say, the perception, excuse me, excuse me. So when we do the definition of manifestation and we apply that to the perception of the stacker units, all of these stacker units have fields coming together to form another. It is this coming together which is a manifestation. And so we're not saying if this manifestation is tangible or non-tangible. We're not saying if it's visible or visible. And we're not saying if it's plasmatic or physical, because the plasma feeding is what leads to the manifestation. So the plasma feeding is the plasma reality, and our physical reality comes from that reality. So whether it's a plasmatic reality or whether it's a physical reality, either case is the manifestation. So whatever manifestation it is a form artifact. So you as an archaeologist can look and see a physical form artifact, or we can see an emotional condition. So we found that an emotion of presence is also a form artifact. But whether it's emotional or whether it's physical, it all deals with energy and motion. So if we are restrictive or limited in our understanding, then when we look at materialism and the focus of our society, we find that all of our attention on materialism is really a manifestation of physicality. Now, one of the things about the advanced science is we know that we have gone into nuclear science. But interestingly, when they talk about nuclear, there's always a reference to nuclear delays. So one of the problems with nuclear science, the way an ordinary person would look at it, or the way we were taught decades ago, was that it may take 20,000 years for radioactive nuclear material to decay. Well, 20,000 years is a little bit longer than the average life expectancy. And so how does that, affect us? So we find that it does breed in a fear, because that is obviously an existential crisis. But it also is derived from a lack of knowledge. So this knowledge is basically the gravitational manifestation, and it's a gravitational transition of the reality. So our reality now has really dumbed down to the pursuit of money. And in effect, what we've done is we've substituted our understanding of what reality is and put in an intermediate, which we call a proxy. So our version of reality is actually a manifestation by proxy vote. And what that means is that if the physicality is limiting, and if our pursuit of money is the materialism and the manifestation of our physicality, then that becomes the pursuit of our limitations. Why are we pursuing our limitations? Why are we not pursuing our unlimitations? So we're very happy to watch TV, and one of the popular subjects is detective TV shows. So we like to watch the detectives. And what do detectives do? They look for clues. And when they find these clues, it's classified as evidence. So then they examine the evidence. So based on the evidence, you make a hypothesis. And you say, well, seeing is believing. See, right there, you've limited the possibilities, because naturally you ask the question, why? Why did this, shall we say, crime happen? But why is not the question? Why is the answer? You see, because the crime did happen. So what you don't know is what's missing. And sometimes what's missing is not evident in the evidence. So really, the lack of evidence is also evidence. And this is what makes detective work so fascinating, because it requires special skills. So what we've been saying in the basic understanding is that energy in this planet flows in, around, and out. And the energy that comes in is absorption. We call that attraction, as part of the gravitational force fields. But in order to come in, it has to go out first. You have to throw out the garbage first, before you can bring the new stuff in. So we emit, and that's called repulsion, and that is a magnetical force. So our existence on this planet is between the Earth and the sky being the magnetosphere. And our range on how we go through all this is what we call susceptibility. But interestingly enough, there are some energy forces that go right through. So, we probably all experienced an X-ray. So it can go through our skin, but it can't go through our bones. So at some point, it can go through, but it reaches a limitation which it can't go through. But then you look at gamma rays, and they go right through not only you, but they go right through the planet. So they have exceeded those limitations. So limitations aren't the final boundary. They are just a boundary, an intermediate boundary. And so we looked at as susceptibility, and we say, okay, well, something has to be something, but we don't know what it is. But here's what we do know, is that nothing can be nothing, because that was one of the things that was limiting us. When I was looking to outer space, and so, well, there's nothing there. Well, really? Well, something, you see, is always something as opposed to being something else, because here we have an experiment to make GANs, and as the GANs is making its rotating field, that energy field increases and grows, and then suddenly there's a hole in my GANs. And I said, well, there's nothing there. How did that happen? So you have to say, seeing is believing. And the believing is, well, there's nothing there, so why not? Well, that's what you have to know. You have to know that there is energy there, and that energy was created. That is your bridge. You don't have to know the details, but it would be beneficial to read Mr. Keshe's books, number 1, which is the Universal Order of Creation. Well, what? I just want to know how to build a cup of life. Yeah, but don't you want to know how you got here, how you were born, what is your purpose and everything? And don't you want to know how matter is created? And well, what school do I have to go to do that? Well, welcome to the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute, and we do have a school for private classes, and many teachers coming, and many more teachers needed to come, because everybody needs to know, how do we get from here to there? And to get from here to there, what do we say? We need a bridge. We need a connection. So that connection was the structure of light. And we find that light has been one of the limitations on this planet, because we see light as a physical thing. So that was extensively discussed in book number 2, The Structure of Light. And so that leads us to book number 3, which is The Origin of the Universe. So now we know how we can create matter, and we know what the origin is, and we can see the connection. But, do we know all these details? Well, it's really hard to do that, because these details are detailed and time consuming. So there have to be some kind of shortcuts. So basic rule, the universe is created from energy, and energy is always in motion. Well, there you go. And so when you look at the creation of matter, the extended knowledge now includes the combination of matter, dark matter, and antimatter. But that's in a single force field. But when you take 2 force fields and they compare each other, and these force fields are already plasmatic, they exchange energy back and forth, and we have rules to do that. So we create a principal matter, but that energy that is always in motion is not only in outer space, but is within our Earth space. And these are PM ticks, and understanding how these PM ticks are always flowing all over the place, then the question is, how do they come together? Well, they interact. And when they interact, they create a force field. And when they are in balance, that is a maggraph. So that is the essence of creation. But our point of view has to be, are we earthbound? Are we spacebound? Or are we soul-bound? And so, really what we have to do is we have to turn around. And the need to turn around is now obvious, because the systems that we're operating on today are not only physically bankrupt, financially bankrupt, but morally bankrupt. So the world operates on the magnetical forces of attraction and repulsion. Those are your basic rules. And now that we got through some terminology and understanding, let's see if we can just add a little bit more knowing here, because there's something that we have to know. What is the natural creation and what is the natural decay? So it has to go from somewhere, and it has to go to somewhere. What is your point of view? Are you the giver or are you the taker? And if you are the giver, that which is the taker also has to be a giver. Does that sound like double talk? Is that confusing? Possibly. So the combination of a maggraph is the combination of the and balance of attraction and repulsion forces. So the aspect of whether it's magnetic or gravitational is actually the residue. And the point is that you have to have a basis to be able to give. And then once you receive, then you have to have a basis to be able to receive this. So if you don't have this basis, then the energy just goes right through, right? So in order for the energy to come in, go around, or go out, you have to have a background. And the going in and the going out is magnetical or gravitational. So what does it mean, natural creation? Well, the natural creation is a higher energy, because now you're gathering energy. So when we talk about the nuclear decay, that is a natural decay. And what is it doing through its natural decay? It is decaying to a lower energy level. What is that lower energy level? Physical. That lower level is physical. So when it's at physical, it's operating at a lower energy level, but it is still doing emission and absorption. So it can maintain at that physical level. But the difference is order of magnitude of energy exchange. So the same way, if we are studying physics and we say, well, we have to understand how everything is working, and we are then going to extend beyond that. Well, you find that the study of physics is limited, and it's self-limited. And one of those self-limitations is we don't know how to create things. And frankly, we don't even really know how to decay things. But if we look at the Keshe model of nuclear decay of the neutron, we not only see how natural decay is done, but we see the creation of rays, of PM ticks. And so we see the breakdown of the neutron into the electron-proton combination. The byproduct of the neutron decay is the combination of the PM tick and the combination of the electron-proton combination. So it's a combination of a combination. So when we look at a condition, we don't know which direction it's going. You see, that's the other aspect. That's the other limitation that physics has. We have a direction of flow. And so not only do we have to know which direction we're going, but we have to know, are we creating or are we decaying? And so whichever direction we're going, whichever level of energy state that we operate in, there are rays being created. And so the fundamental component of creation is this ray motion. So we're not saying which direction or which field or which energy strength, because the rules are all the same. You see, when we look at PM ticks in the universe and how they come together and form the basic dimensions of the X, Y, and Z axis, we understand, because energy is always in motion, that we can't stop it. So it's continually moving. So the only way to contain it is through a field rotation. And so the PM ticks are magnetical and the MAGRAV unit is gravitational, and that the area in between, what we call the transition zone, is the bridge. And this is how we know. We know by connection. So we don't have to be rocket scientists. We just have to know the rules. The PM ticks are magnetical. They are energy packs. They travel all over the place, whether it's an Earth field or space field. But when these fields have a commonality, we create a force field, which is a combination of antimatter, dark matter, and matter. We see that these have characteristics. The antimatter is the principal matter, and the matter is the convergence of all this energy. And we find the dark matter is the transition matter. All of these, when they come together, they convert into a plasma. And that plasma then has to have a condition. And that condition is the environment. And so the interaction with our environment is the interaction energy transaction that we call inertia. So now we understand that when we have a convergence or divergence of energy, that it has to have a basis of attraction and repulsion. And it is from there that we have the gravitational magnetical action. And this action is an independent variable. But this independent variable is based on the interdependence of the universe. So in other words, an action by you has an effect on others. And there's always an interdependence. And so the reason that peace is important is because the universe is built on dependability, and you cannot depend on undependability. And so when we look at the cups of life, we find they are not just the cups of the pandemic, they are the cups of life, because this is a universal law. And this universal law is now extended to our physics and our physicality. And so we make physical cups. And we need to keep talking about that, because after 21 months, the people who are paid to look after it are not succeeding. So we have to exercise our universal right. Make the cup. Make the cup. Zinc plate, copper coil, nano-coated copper coil. These are the physical components. When you put them together, they create a plasmatic magnetical field and a plasmatic gravitational field. And then the second cup, we substitute the zinc plate for a copper plate, and we do the same thing. We connect them, create an environment, and create a magnetical field and a gravitational plasma field, and the two work together. But there's a relationship. One is emotional, one is physical. So I look at the individual components, and they are all based on periodic table of elements, right? So how do they all work together? Well, there's an interacting plasma field that is not visible. And when we are dealing with specifics of energy and motion, such as an energy pack or a virus, then we want to keep these batches apart, because there's an emotional component and a physical component. And these fields grow because they all both work under the same principle. You have a magnetical plasma field creation, a gravitational plasma field creation, and that's a MAGRAV condition of extra strength, which goes beyond the physical limitations of the glass cup. So that's another limitation, right? The physical boundary of the glass cup is not a physical boundary. We've broken through that boundary. And as we do that and we apply it to the virus, we see that the virus has a structure, but this structure has a gravitational magnetical relationship. And so what we need to do is deplete the energy. And if we can't deplete the energy, we can convert the energy. And if we convert it, then we have to decide, convert it to what? Well, this is additional knowledge that we're going to be talking about weeks down the road. So this is part of the basics of knowing. And in that basics of knowing, we know that our structure is emotional and our structure is physical. But mainly, it's physical because that's how we operate on this planet. Everything we do is physical. But there's a relationship that we have to take into account now, that there's an emotional energy which is of a higher strength, a higher order of magnitude. And now that we've made that connection, then we know that the combination of the emotional and the physical creates a magnetical field. Then we create a gravitational field. And now we have a basis for our soul. And so we understand now that not only does each cup have the representation of a magnetical gravitational force field, but also a soul field. And the combination of the three cups creates a magnetic gravitational relationship and a soul field. And that representation of us in respect to our physicality then has to take into account our environment and its physicality. And so we had the cup of inertia, where we introduced a copper coil and another copper coil and another copper plate, and all of them nano-coated. And they all did the same thing. They created a magnetical plasma field and a gravitational plasma field, and they grew. The cup of the earth is the same way, except we changed one component. We changed it now to an iron coil. All three are nano-coated, a zinc coil, iron coil, and a copper plate, all nano-coated, and they all, again, have a magnetical plasma field, a gravitational plasma field. And so when we look at our physicality and we look at something, let's say, like a teacup, or we look at it as a Gans cup, can we see the force fields? And if seeing is believing, then you will believe that they're both the same. But if you understand the science, and you don't have to understand how it works, you just have to know that it is there. And so these cups are infused with Gans. And we all know the power and exchange capability of Gans. And we all know that Gans can be physical, or wait, we can have a hole in our Gans. Well, you know what? We've got a hole in our cup. And this is good because we can pour liquid in that cup, let it sit for about 30 minutes, and we can enjoy some benefits from the cup of sweet, or the cup of pressure, or the ceramic cup of life. All of this has to do with a changing of our physicality. In other words, we have chains on an atomic basis, and we have chains on a monatomic basis. But the difference is that the monatomic chains are cooperative, interdependent. And the knowledge of this technology is the unchaining of man. Do we need unchaining? Well, yes, we do. You see, because we are not from the ground up. We are not working just for the benefit of the earth. we have a purpose. And one of the benefactors is the earth. So we have an inertia reaction with the earth, but we also have a structure and a substructure that includes our soul interacting with our emotion, interacting with our physicality. And this becomes an important determination. Now that we've concluded the understanding, what does it mean? So when we look at the range on this planet, which is all we're all familiar with, we look at the distance between the ground and the sky, and that is our transition range. But if we go from continent to continent, or from our home to the grocery store, these are all the transmission ranges. So we can go up and down through the y-axis, or we can go along the surface of the earth, and that's the x-axis. But it all boils down to going from range to range. What does it mean to go over a range? In physics, we call that a watershed. And the reason for it is because despite the that the top of the mountains are closer to the sun, we have ice on the top of the mountains and we have water in the valleys. Okay, so that's a good thing. And then when the temperature changes and this ice melts and becomes liquid, it runs down the mountain. Which side of the mountain does it come down? And so when we look at something physical like geography, then we look at the topography to determine where the watersheds are, and then we know which direction the rivers are flowing. Okay, so that's pretty handy. But the flowing of the rivers is a physical thing. So there is a plasmatic substructure to the physical thing. We said there's a plasmatic reality and a physical reality. So now what I want to point out is that in order for us to determine what is our physicality, we have to determine on which side of the watershed we are. This becomes our point of knowing. So when we look at something and we say, okay, we have 3 dimensions, an X, Y, and Z. And, you know, accountants like to do statistical analysis. Well, so do scientists. So what they do is they extrapolate they extrapolate statistics. And they say, well, you know, I had $1, and after 1 year I made $2. So maybe I'm doubling my money, or maybe I'm increasing $1. So it's entirely possible that after 2 years, if I increase $1, I'll go from 1 to 2 to $3. But if I'm doubling, I may go from 1 to 2 to $4. So we can do all this kind of analysis, and then we find sometimes, because this analysis affects our decision making, we become paralyzed. We become paralyzed through overanalysis. And this becomes a nightmare where you not only extrapolate in one dimension, but you, shall we say, extrapolate in other dimensions, and you bring all these factors in. And so I like to call that extrapolation, Y-trapolation, or Z-trapolation. It's a trap, whichever way you look at it, because we all like to talk about prophecy, and we all like to talk about crystal ball gazing. But the fact of the matter is, the past does not reflect the future, except if in the absence of a change. Such as, for instance, when we look at surface to volume ratios, if we say that a straight line is negative on the outsides and the connection between those two outsides is the line, so that's the connection, and it will remain that way unless there is a change. So one of the change we could do is put a bend in the road. And so now we've introduced another negative charge. So we have 3 negative charges with 2 connections. and those two connections are positive. This manifestation of physicality is the same as a curve, and we discussed that in the basic teachings. But when is a curve a coil? So if we continue the curve, then it turns into a coil. And this is the essence of the nanotechnology, you see, because when you look at energy flowing back and forth, it goes through an infinity loop. How can it go through an infinity loop when energy is going somewhere? Well, as we go through various stages, various energy stages, and as they change in order of magnitude, then there's an applied curvature, and that curvature gets us into the nanotechnology, into the GANS technology, into the plasma technology, and now we understand the infinity loop. And then we look at what is the difference here between plates, coils, and nano-coated coils. There is a physical difference. And this is the, shall we say, the game plan for the stacker unit. But now we have a game plan for the cup of the universe. And the difference between the stacker unit and the cup of the universe is that there are 5 cups in the stacker unit with 3 components in each cup. Simple math, 3 times 5, there are 15 components. But in the cup of the universe, we have 10 components. Okay, well, let's take a physical inventory. And so what we see in the first column is the element. And so we have when we call it a CuO or ZnO, because this is nano-coated. So the Cu is copper, the Zn is zinc, the Fe is iron, and the C is a composite of iron, which we call galvanized. So that is, shall we say, simplicity's sake, a zinc-plated iron plate. Okay, but if you see the components, and that's all we did, which is we took a physical inventory, right? We want to see what's in there. Some are coils, some are plates. Okay, and then some are bare and some are nano-coated. Okay, well, this is good. So now we have details, right? And there's a problem with these details, you see, because as a detective, we can't see what's going on. And as a famous once detective said, you see, my dear Watson, it's elementary. And the problem with elements is that they are elementary. Life is much more complex. So we are wont to take things apart to see how they work. But what you have to know is that the sum of the parts is greater than the sum of the parts. By putting the parts all together, you've created something. So it's nice to know the details, but do you know the details of knowing? So if I put a bunch of electronic components on the table, will you know if it's a TV, a radio, or a computer? But if I put all the parts together and then present to you a TV, then you will know that that is a TV. Do you have to know the details of that TV? And that's the point. Everyone has their specialty, and everybody's specialty is determined by their uniqueness, and their uniqueness is based on the periodic table of elements, right? And so I've highlighted magnesium and calcium as 2 of the elements, because what we've done here is we've reorganized the periodic table of elements so that we put that row on the right-hand side. And why is that? Because the row with the neon, argon, and krypton is neutral. So we have on one side elements such as chlorine, and on the other side we have elements such as magnesium. And so we're looking at what are the effects down the road, and we're going to talk about that more next week. But the point being here is that these table of elements, which are including all the individual components, and it's nice to know about these individual components, and it's nice to investigate each of them, and we just break them all down and find out what is their mass, how many protons do they have, and what is the relationship. And so that becomes the same thing that we do with our music. These physical periodic table of elements is our physical kit. And in music, we also have a kit. We need to know what the notes are. We need to know what the scales are. We need to know the difference between high C and low C, or we need to know the difference between A and D. All right. And so it's fine to know that the low notes are magnetical and the high notes are gravitational, but that's not music. And the music is the combination, and it also involves a player. Okay. And this is how we do with music. Well, we do the same thing with our physicality. It's nice to know the details, but when you put it all together and you understand, well, we have a dynamic field and we have a small m matter state field, and we have all these states in between. And not only that, but there are transfer states in between each individual state. So we have some kind of transformation from our plasmatic state, which is non-physical, to our matter state, which is physical. And it is this transformation that we have to learn. And as we are learning and rapidly learning, we are leaving people behind. So there has to be some kind of knowing by connection. So one of the ways we've done this is with the stacker unit, but now we're going to move away from the stacker unit, because you see the stacker unit has a bus, and that bus is our brain. And so that brain and the configuration of what is going on in that brain is something that is affecting the cup of universe. And so we're going to talk about that later on as well, because what we want to do is understand the difference between knowledge and knowing. So knowing is the bridge, and the knowledge is crossing the bridge. We did basic teaching, we did basic understanding. Now we're going to go through the basic knowing, because we couldn't talk about these subjects without this basic teaching and this basic understanding. We couldn't bridge the gaps to higher learning at a higher order of magnitude. And it has to be at a higher order of magnitude, because we're never going to keep up. And this is not really a problem. We do this all the time because we all have ideas, we have wishes, we can display courage, and we can display love. And these are all energies that travel at a higher frequency and a higher energy. And when they get into a plasmatic condition, they're at orders of magnitude even higher. And we operate like that all the time. So this is the determining factor. This is the plasmatic reality, which is the substructure for our physical reality. And our physical reality, we always look for the lowest common denominator, don't we? Well, the plasma science would look at for the common denominator. Doesn't have to be the lowest. It could be the highest common denominator. Okay, so the denominator is the elementary particle. And that comes because we see one of the limitations of science was that the universe is empty. The universe is full of energy. That energy is always in motion, and as such, that motion carries a charge, so you know which way is going, which way you're going. Whatever you're creating has an energy exchange. So that energy exchange is an exchange in the plasma field. And that is the transaction currency of the universe. And the motion of this plasma field exchange is the plasma fuel. And the universe is limitless. So we have to understand that elementary is not the way it works. All things work in combination. So if you break it down to the single element, you are missing the rest of the show. And the rest of the show involves a magnetical pushing and pulling back and forth until a mag-grav condition is in balance. And then there's a residue to maintain that mag-grav condition, which means there's an interaction with other plasmas. And we know that because when we looked in a cup of life, we had physical proof that something happened. We put in 3 elements, a zinc plate, a copper coil, and a nano-coated copper coil, and we got zinc GANs, copper GANs, CO2 GANs, calcium carbonate GANs, amino acids, and water, all of this just in that one little simple cup of life. And we know that we can get a hole in our GANs if we get the fields working properly. And so even beyond what we see, there are things that we don't see. And even still, we know that the field can go right through the glass, the limitations of the glass, and how far it can go, I don't know. It always depends. So when we understand the subject of physics, there's a certain kind of knowing that goes along with the physics. And the thing that was amazing to me was the limitations. And so we find that life can be a maze of limitations. And then the limitations can have limitations. So the basic limitations that we've been able to break down, the speed of light, because there's a physical light and there's a non-physical light, but the light carries a mass. So we looked at the mass calculation and we found that that didn't work on the periodic table of elements. And then you see that if we don't understand these relationship between these 2 limitations, we're never going to be able to do space travel. But the fact of the matter is that life can be amazing. And so there are other factors to take into consideration beyond physics. And one of the ways we achieved that was grasping and understanding of totality. When you look at the neutron mass, and we find that that actually equals the proton mass plus the electron mass plus the mass of the PM6 plus the total mass of matter, antimatter, and dark matter. That is the totality that is achieved through the energy level balancing and positioning. Okay, so we have to introduce other factors. And the reason for that, you say, why? Well, why is not the question. Why is the answer. Our little tiny perfect world down there inside that, what we say is man's universe, is only one little tiny aspect of the origin of the universe. And now we can answer these questions. So this is a good thing. We are now having to understand that our point of view is that we are plasma beings and our energy source is our soul. So the physical manifestation is the lowest manifestation. And it's just our point of view. Are we looking at it from the Earth's point of view or our point of view? Are we looking at it from the visible reality or the non-visible reality? And we also have to take into consideration our environment, because there are variables. Okay, so when we revisit physics like we're doing today, what we need to acknowledge is all the breakthroughs that we have achieved and how this affects our knowing. So take, for instance, we have a sound barrier. So by definition, that is a barrier of the speed of sound. But we find that when a jet fighter plane breaks the sound barrier, that it can go beyond that speed. So that's not like the flat earth where you fall off the edge of the earth. This is just one barrier and you go through that and you carry on. And so this has been the evolution of rocket science. And then we have a light barrier. And so our light barrier is representative of our physicality, and our physicality is limited to our earth and our immediate visible environment. But it's kind of limited our space science, all right? Because we're using the rocket science as part of the space science. So despite the fact that we've broken these barriers, we're still limited. So we broke another barrier. Many of you have seen the Tesla 129 experiment, where we broke that barrier. And that was the manifestation of the plasma science. And that plasma science was done on Earth. Isn't that interesting? So now we see that we've broken many knowledge barriers. And these knowledge barriers are breaking physics limitations. But you see, the thing about it is that now it's changing our understanding, because there's a lot of carryover. We carry over a lot of these limitations. So I have been teaching in the Spanish community as well. And we broke through a major barrier because we had this huge discussion. And I'm just going to mention it very briefly, and it had to do with Oregon. And the thing was that we finally figured out what side of the watershed does it fall on. And we found that it had a physical color. Okay, so that's part of physics. And then recently we talked about crop circles. And we found that that was a product of physical designs. So that is on the physical side of the watershed. And so it would be created by saucers. So there's saucers, what we call UFOs, that created these crop circles. We didn't see who created the crop circle, but we saw the physical manifestation of the circles. And so they had to be created physically. Okay, so we know on what watershed, what side of the watershed this is done. It's done on the man-made watershed. This is, you don't need to know the details. You just need to know the connection. You just need to know the limitations of what it means. One of the limitations, of course, is the need to know. Okay, there's a need to know, there's a want to know. Some of us impose those limitations on ourselves. On a need to know basis, that imposition is called classification or compartmentalization. And that involves secrecy or confidentiality. There is a place for that. This is also important as part of crisis management, but it is also used for high crimes and misdemeanors. We are now in an existential crisis, and we have a universal right to look after our own health. So that is our right to know, and that is the need to know. When you say, what is our knowing? Our knowing is basically this. We know that there are limitations to the physics because it identifies different energy states, and plasma is a kind of this energy state. And because of the situation in our tiny perfect world right now, this is important. This is an existential crisis. But where does it stem from? What is the root of this? So we know that part of creation is the binding of energy, but do we have to do it at the expense of others? And do we have to get really good at it? Because this, we now are going to find out, is the cross you double cross is actually your eternal burden. All right, because there is an ethos in the universe that goes beyond the speed of light, beyond the basic understanding of physics. It involves the ethics of the universe, which involves morality, compassion, and courage. And these are the essences of creation, because life wants to live. And life cannot live if it has a malevolent soul. And souls are not malevolent. In fact, a malevolent operation is very physical, and we are getting involved in the plasma-bound science, which is the restoration of the emotional and physical vitality. And not only that, but we have a material enhancement unit as well. So what we're now learning, and the possibility of learning deeply, is the connection between our source of existence and our physical existence. And we are the connection. We are the knowers. We are the ones. We don't need Mama Cat. It'd be nice to have, but we don't need Mama Cat because the souls will never lie. And as we seek constantly to get back to nature, understand that that seeking is irrelevant because you are nature. Everything we do is natural. The magnetical gravitational forces of the sun, the earth, and our physicality is based on this dynamic transfer state. This dynamic transfer state is what brings us to this physical destination state. And so today we're discussing the physicality of physics. And in the process, we're also discussing the limitations of physics as we know it. But as we get into the universal cup and understanding the universal cup, we have to rely not on the details, but on our knowing, on our interpretation of the basic understanding and understanding the destination of where we're going. Because you see, what goes around comes around. Isn't that what they say? And isn't that the way we create a Magrath condition? But when you look at the Universal Council logo, you will find that there is no physical substrate there. It's only a plasmatic substrate. And the manifestation of our physicality is also in a plasmatic substrate. So what is more important than our physicality is our soul food. And this is what we talked about. And we need to tune in to the energies of the universe, turn on the power of the universe, and drop out of our physicality, allow our souls to receive so that we can provide the pattern for our physicality. You provide the pattern, you get the energy. Those are the basic rules. And we are at an existential crisis point because not only are we the messengers of peace and friendship, but we have to understand that we are all patriots. This is the independent variable. And we're not patriots of just one country. We are universal patriots because we have now the universal language of knowing. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute presentation on plasma science, which we're putting into the public domain on the condition that we achieve world peace. We ask everyone to sign the World Peace Treaty with a pen and sign it also with your intention, because this is how we're going to bring peace and harmony, not only to our planet, but we're going to bring physical and emotional harmony and vitality to our humanity. And so in this process, as knowledge seekers, we become truth seekers, but understand that truth seekers don't necessarily become difference makers. That is the plan. So plasma science needs to be delivered in exchange for peace on Earth. Thank you so much. I hope you are enjoying this new venture down this path on the basics of knowing. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Over to you, Mark.
Well, thank you, Alex, for sharing more knowledge. I think we can open the mics up now. With 39 people here, someone should have a question. I was thinking about atoms, and I know Mr. Keshe said one atom could expand into an entire universe. Yeah. And so if we have one atom, would you say that's equal to one dimension? And then like a molecule made up of several different atoms or elements. Would that be what you're talking about, connecting dimensions? Like when we have molecules?
Well, exactly. And that's why you get into the other subject. You see, the physics is your entry into the science, shall we say. But it isn't an exclusive club. We're all physics scientists in different ways. So the limitation of physics is that it's an educational thing. It's a, shall we say, academic achievement. The understanding of physics being an academic achievement, which involves, going to school and university and getting diplomas and all this stuff, which is a verification of validation that you have been through this process. So does that exclude those who haven't been through that process, whether it be through ability or financial capability or social issues or war or peacetime issues, those type of things? So not all of us have had that ability. So does that exclude? And so we're saying no, it doesn't. And the whole purpose of what I tried to achieve today, and to answer your question specifically, number one, if we understand that there is a watershed between the physics and the rest, and if we understand that it is limited, and if we understand that it's elementary, then by the virtue of you asking that question, you understand the difference between an atom and a molecule. And that's when we get into the other subjects listed here, like ranging from chemistry to religiosity. These are all relationships. So the understanding of physics being elementary is not taking enough into account. And how do you take enough into account, and how do you decide this is part of the basic knowing? It's a great question, Mark. Thank you.
Okay. So I was reading or hearing from Mr. Kesh about how everything we put in our mouth is more or less a molecule. And when it enters into the body, it enters into an entirely new universe, not even connected at all to the planet. And then these field forces within this universe starts to break down the molecules, I guess, into their individual components or something. And they get to release almost like the shooting star. It's fine until it hits our atmosphere, and then it starts to break up into or dissolve into other things or fields. And that's similar to what's going on in the body, I would imagine. We're taking these molecules in, it gets introduced to the vacuum state and then into a whole new universe. And then it's torn apart, and our body seems to be coiled around this tube, which we extract the energy is transferred through the wall, some of the energies.
See, I'm really glad that you brought this up, Mark. Okay, because you said a few key words, and one of them was breakdown. And that's one of the ways that we do science. We tear things apart to see how they work, and that's not how they work. We don't break it down into the elemental components. We break it down into cooperative components based on need. And in order to have that cooperative component, we have to have both the magnetical and the gravitational force fields, right? There has to be a turning on and a turning off, an enhancement and a suppression. It's a two-way street, and that's one of the limitations that physics has. It's missing this two-way street aspect of it. So the other aspect of it is that we compare our bodies to, say, mining, and if we drill into the surface of the earth, we may find oil or we may find copper, And then, if we drill into our body, we may find blood or we may find bones. Okay, but it doesn't explain how the body works. And the reason for that is because our body is already in a gas state. So by taking something that's physical and putting it in the mouth, we are automatically elevating that to our energy state that we operate on. And the manifestation of the physicality of the earth and the byproducts of the earth, which for that industry we call mining. So if you're looking at oil and you dig down and you find oil, does not answer the question of where the oil came from. So one of the the sciences that we look at is geology. And what geology does is it compares the environment to find similarities, assuming that in the similar environment and only that criteria that they will find that product. So there's a high probability that when you look at that kind of geological structure that you're going to find that type of thing. But the confirmation of it is still that they're going to have to drill down and do a core sample, okay? Because all that is guesswork. And the only way that they can confirm that knowing of that guesswork is through the drilling. But it still doesn't answer the question, where did the oil come from? Where did the fuel come from? The earth made it. And how did the earth make it? And we don't know how it made it. So, we call these fossil fuels. Well, the only people who call these fossil fuels are those who are fossilized into the traditions of physics. And those are imposing limitations on knowing. So let's break those barriers. Hi, John. Welcome.
Hello. Now, why do they call him petroleum? Petrus or Petras is stone. It's oil from a stone.
Certainly. So, why do they call amino acids acidic when some amino acids are alkaline? So the way we've evolved through physics based on our technology has given us some kind of misconceptions. And although we have realigned them, we have maybe carried forward some of these terminologies. So if you look at the periodic table of elements, we did not start at number 1. And we didn't go in sequence. They were all discovered at various stages by different scientists, depending on the nearness and proximity to the technology required to identify them, right? So our science has a lot of carried forward understanding, and we haven't had the capability of knowing about the speed of light, but we have had physics experiments which went beyond that, and that information has been scrubbed from the internet. So if you know about this but you can't get the confirmation of that, does that mean it doesn't exist? So and even by what you just said, John, now that I'm thinking about it, is a fossil a petrograph? Or what's your take on that, John?
Well, I haven't gone into that extreme, but scientists say the bones sort of are filled with other elements apart from calcium. Now, if you think of our body, have you seen the elements in our body? Now, only 2% are all different materials beside water and amino acids, of which 1.5% of our weight is calcium. Now, where is all the rest of the weight of our bones?
I'm sorry to laugh, but you know, you really hammered that nail home. If you look at our environment, it's almost 80% nitrogen.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, when we understand so very little about nitrogen. So these are the impositions of the knowledge of physics, the way we have been taught, because as a subject, we are always looking for those other elusive elements, right? Where's the concentration of the physics now? It's looking for the high end on the periodic table of elements, right? I mean, look what they're doing at CERN, right? They've got this rotating reactor that is bigger than the city. So, you know, you and I can't do that experiment in our home, but we can take a cup of life and put a rotating field in the cup of life and produce GANs. So, you know, I would say that one is excluding us because of its physics and financial requirements, and the plasma science is including us because this is knowledge for everyone. We don't want to leave anyone behind because that invites abuse. And abuse, the foundation of abuse is the lack of knowledge. But how can you teach all the details?
There's
So
another thing. Scientists are continually deceiving each other. For at least 50 years, we know that from the rescued UFOs, they have managed to get hold of an impendium, 115 element. Now, they haven't even got there yet, have they?
Yeah, but what you're saying is that's in physicality.
Yeah.
So that's the answer to your question, John. Which side of the watershed is it on? The moment you say, boom, that's in physicality, you know that that's a physical manifestation.
Yes, yes.
That's the point.
But
That
I'm
is
talking
the
about
answer.
the scientists. They don't make up their minds.
Oh, no, the thing is that why is the answer? Why is the answer? Okay. The knowing is the bridge that connects it all. If
Why, as my grandmother used to say, why wasn't born to be Z?
smart grandmother. There's just a lot of people like to have their grandmothers have breakfast together.
You know, we talk about this term preemptics, and I had a lot of problems with that originally and still do, I would say. But if I could just read a little bit from, and I forgot to mention the books in the store, and these books 1, 2, and 3 are very, very valuable, and they can be reread over and over again. But if I could just read from the book for a paragraph or so. The initial fundamental particles of plasma. This was in chapter 3. The initial fundamental particles, components of plasma, are considered to be a collection of weak plasmatic magnetic fields. In short, preemptics, originally existing in the spans of galaxies. These are residuals of different plasmatic magnetic field activities of matters and matter mass, which are released by the interaction of different magnetic fields by and through processes such as fission and fusion within stars and so on. It is considered that some of these weaker plasmatic magnetic fields are released into the environment by the nuclear decay of atoms themselves too. So I just thought I'd add that because that term preemptics, it just seems a little bit strange, but it's a collection of weak plasmatic magnetic fields, in short, preemptics. So nothing to be confused about. And this starts the initial fundamental particles of plasma.
That was great, Mark. Thank you.
Hopefully it added a little bit to the knowledge.
No, we're all adding to the knowledge. The thing is that we, society makes us feel deficient for whatever reason. And it only succeeds in doing that if we allow it. So as I say, the absence of the knowledge is a point of discrimination, just like all the other points of discrimination that we have. And what Mr. Kesh has allowed us to understand is that this knowledge is available to all of us. And how much we wish to know and how much detail we wish to have is an individual wish. But within half an hour, you can create a cup of life that would allow you to go to bed with the peace of mind that you don't have to worry about this pandemic. And if we can, the reason I keep bringing it up, because even if we were to able to stop this pandemic, as you said earlier on, overnight, we still need the cups of life. All right, because the damage to this planet has been going on for, well, since the last great washing. And you have to ask yourself, was that real? You weren't there, right? But when you see the 7 societies on this planet all teach about the Great Flood, I think it's real.
Yes, it could have been a point of reset, perhaps, or elimination of certain things and sort of with a new beginning.
And then, of course, when you look at the terminology, you know, I mean, the Ark, you know, what kind of boat is that? You know, is that a cruise ship? Is that a aircraft carrier? What is that? And then, you know, all these animals coming 2 by 2, and, you know, who brings the hay, you know, to feed the horses, and who cleans up the waste? And what do you do with that? And, you know, seeing as things are kind of wet, I mean, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. And, well, how long is 40 days and 40 nights? But, you know, and where did the hay come from? And what happens if you run out of the hay after the first week? And, you know, how much do you have to carry with you? And aren't these the problems that the International Space Center is contending with all the time? And then what happens if you develop a leak? As you know, they're finding there are cracks in the superstructure of the space station. How do you fix these leaks in outer space? All sorts of physical, technical problems.
Okay, anyone else want to raise a point or bring up something to discuss that you've been wondering about? Or we may be able to answer. There's a lot of knowledge here in this meeting. Many of us carry different parts, and some of us, we all carry the totality. It's just a matter of accessing it. But are there any questions you'd like to raise?
Mark, I'd like to tell a little story about the strength of the plasma water.
Fine.
Last year, I taught some people to make their own plasma water. They called me last night laughing on the phone stating, we had our regular meeting to play cards, and the other people saying I was just drinking water and not drinking any wine. And they said, well, what is that? She said, that's Gans water. Would you like a taste? The one guy said, yeah. Okay, so we took it. They played some more cards. An hour later, she says, okay, anybody want any more wine? And the man said, no, I want more of that water and I want to know how to make it. And these are the people in their upper 80s. So folks, the plasma water does make a difference. It does change the consciousness, and it makes lots of joy when I hear a story like that you've shared with someone else, and then they call you back to share their own experiences. I hand the talk stick back to you, Mark.
Sure. And a friend of mine has a rabbit, and it's about 18 years old, which I think is quite old for a rabbit, but it's sort of been in a large cage, but it's been there for 18 years, and I don't think it's ever interacted with any other rabbits. And so they said he's getting kind of a little bit shy and doesn't seem to be as happy anymore. So I offered to bring them the plasma water, Cup of Life 1, and let's see if it actually elevates the rabbit in a way. Of course, it may be time for the rabbit to separate. And of course, it doesn't matter what you do if the souls agree that it's time to separate. Even if he was in love with another rabbit, the soul would still separate. So, but we're going to try it, and I think it'd be proof to, or some sort of proof to my friends, husband and wife there. And of course, they've been thinking all this technology is rather, not for them, but it is for them. But hopefully we can make a little bit of an inroad. I'll bring some plasma water of Cup 1, and they'll put it in the rabbit's dish, and we'll get a report back from the rabbit, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, and see what happens. So yes, the animals enjoy it as well. And they want to elevate, and they will elevate. As Mr. Kesh said, we're going to take the ants and the lions with us and see how they manifest in the inertia of other locations.
I can tell you another thing, that my female cat had to have an operation. There's just a little bit of a laser thing, and every day I took her little gown off and I sprayed Cup 1 water on it every day. And after 10 days, there was hardly any scar at all. Totally healed up, much happier cat, amazing healing. And she knew, she would come to me and paw at me in the morning. Well, where's my stuff? The animals know instinctively, they know this energy. They'll go to it all the time.
Right, and amazing that the new systems for operations won't even leave a scar. Apparently the skin is just going to open up in some manner for the operation. And I thought Mr. Kesh said that they would go in there and change a heart valve. I was thinking we can do things plasmatically with the valves. I know he said we saw or have some MRIs, some videos of the fields actually repairing a heart valve without even entering the body. I think he said that was in China that they have that recorded. But amazing that the tissue, the skin will open up for the surgeons to do the operation and then close back up just like if it was never even operated on. So this is the knowledge that the foundation is carrying. And I mean, it's just going to shock people day to day, but this is great because we need this exposure to the new knowledge, and especially with the problems we're facing. We're facing a lot of problems, so we're going to have a lot of new knowledge to intervene and to solve these and get us to change our direction. And the United States needs a lot of that. They seem to be quite, like I said, they already know more than they use, and they don't seem to want to know more. But as we start to see these breakthroughs and this demonstration of the technology, more and more people, it's going to be a flood, as Mr. Kesh said at one time. You're not ready for what's going to happen. He was talking to the knowledge seekers. So
one change I would like to see There was a beautiful video in Brazil where 40 knowledge seekers came together in a workshop. I think that would be a monumental achievement to get that many people together without maybe having a case of beer or a football game to attract them. I'm talking about North America.
Yes, and getting the clergy involved as well. I think the churches are being depleted more and more month by month. So let's get the clergy more involved and bring some people back into the church, not to loot their pocket or their soul, but a real place of elevation, of understanding of the knowledge and the soul, which I think would be a beautiful, beautiful way. Hopefully this will be the time that the Pope will be stepping down and open up to this knowledge themselves and acknowledge it to the members of the congregation. And again, he just said we're going to be bringing these religions together, the Buddhists, the Christians, the Muslims, and the Jewish sect. This is one of the beauties. And of course, that's what the Mekti is all about, uniting the nations and the peoples together. And this is the common knowledge that we're all going to be connected with. Connected with and by. Anyone else want to come in here and share something? Now, Daniel has put something in the chat in regard to replacement of heart valves. The replicator unit can be used by having a person with a healthy heart bend over so that their heart is above the unit, and then placing the damaged heart over the unit, and the transfer of the fields should solve the problem. If I remember correctly, a few years ago, this was taught by Mr. Kesh in one of the workshops. Do you want to expound on that, Daniel? He has a beautiful speaking voice.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, for my microphone. Yeah, I remember this vaguely. I can't remember because I don't have my notes currently, but I remember this being taught. And it was maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. And of course, I didn't have the damage to my heart that I have now. But I was actually thinking of making a replicator unit. You know, it's the same thing that transfers the taste of an orange into the Ganzbar. And now the Kesh Foundation is actually offering this as one of their products. So I'm going to buy one at the first opportunity and give it a try.
I remember that about kidneys as well. I think he was talking about kidneys, about bringing someone with a good kidney closer to someone, and I may be wrong here, with a bad kidney, and to be able to transfer the fields and to
exactly,
help the repair.
I remember that one as well. And sorry about my voice, but in the afternoon, due to the medications I'm taking, it fades quite a bit. If I can get there early in the morning, I'm much clearer.
Yes, you've told us that before. Were you ever interviewed on some of your successes with some of the things you've done? Have we
Well-
ever gotten to interview you?
I was going to set something up with Ed, and then I was just starting to take the water from the ceramic cup, but I
Yes.
read the directions, which were not very clear, and I overindulged. So I said, well, it was actually affecting certain parts of my physical appearance. So I cut out of that. I'm back on it now again, but I've only been on it for about maybe 3 or 4 days. And I started gradually, and I'll get back to Ed maybe, I don't know, give me another week or two. And
That's
maybe-
great. That is very nice, Daniel, for offering that testimonial. And of course, we need a talent release to do anything with it,
Yeah.
which you'd have to sign and release. But I'm sure Ed would be happy to take your interview and create something for the KF television.
Yeah.
That can
No,
be
I
shown.
intend to carry through with that. I backed out because of the fact that I had overindulged in the water from the ceramic cup. So I said, well, I'll back off, because I think that was to be part of the interview with the effects of the ceramic cup light. Which
That-
is,
That was the cup of light, the ceramic cup.
that's
Yes.
right. Yeah.
Okay.
I made the cup of life a long time ago, and I had contracted, well, we know that if you've had chicken pox, you can get shingles.
Yes.
I had a bad case of shingles on my face, which my daughter, who's a nurse, diagnosed, but I didn't know that. At first, I thought it was just maybe a rash from orange juice. When I realized what was happening, then I started applying the cup 1 to it, and it stopped the virus immediately. Now there was damage, quite a bit of lower damage to my lower cheek, but there was also,
This was the shingles you're speaking of.
yeah, the shingles, and there were new eruptions coming around my orbital bone of my right eye. But when I applied the cup 1 water, they immediately stopped and disappeared with no scarring whatsoever within a day or two.
That's another beautiful testimony that can be included.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I've been leading a very interesting existence. Unfortunately, some of the interesting parts were not what I was looking forward to, but
How did your daughter take it, Daniel? You said she's a nurse.
they think I'm crazy, and I give them proof, as with my shingle, and they just ignore it. They're so highly conditioned, Mark, that it's a wonder they can think straight. There is just no critical thinking at all left in my family. None.
Well, that's what I've given plasma water to people and it's helped them. And I said, oh, great. Now we're going to have a new knowledge seeker and I'll be able to team up with someone in my area, because I don't really know anyone in my area. There may be some people I'm not aware of, but yet they never came back to me, even though they reported good results.
Yeah,
And I found that astonishing. I
they
just,
are so highly conditioned. I mean, the amount of subliminal messaging, the total control of news outlets, media, and of course peer pressure. Like, we become our own gatekeeper. And
Yeah.
essentially, I never thought this could happen, but I know there was a very good video put out by, what's his name, Mark Paseo, on how they can control whole civilization. And it's very simple. You can only react to and condition according to what your brain understands. And if it only understands what they want you to understand, you have no other way of reacting. So all the educational system, all the media, I mean, there was no accident that the Rockefeller Foundation bought out all the book publishing, the educational book publishing, years ago. You know, so they all get the same, no matter who you buy the book from, you're all getting the same information. Then you can only react to a circumstance according to what information you have available in your brain. And it's very easily done. Once you get hold of the educational system, get hold of the media, get hold of all the advertising means, and you start using subliminal messaging, you've got them. And we are looking at zombie apocalypse. No, I don't think it's going to get there, but it could have been. And we know what we're involved in. It should give us the opposite, but it's going to take patience. It's going to take time. But anyway, that's all I can say.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing and contributing. Yes, I know Jalal often refers to filters and different things. Perhaps he'd like to mention that, but Mr. Kesh also says that you can only take from this knowledge what your intellect allows, what is comfortable within this domain of existence for you. So that's another limiting factor as well.
Well, the fact that when I had my stroke, it really damaged my brain enough that, you know, where I was finding everything very easy to follow, now it gets much more difficult. You know, my thinking processes are dramatically slowed down. Luckily, I didn't become paralyzed. It didn't affect my centers of speech, but the critical centers of thought are not what they used to be. But, you know, and then there's the enhancement machines.
There we go.
I think it's temporary. And it's wonderful. I've been following this since late November of 2014. I came in on workshop number 27 when they were just getting into the GAN. They were getting away from the earlier reactors, which were based on, I forget now, my memory's not so good, but that was back in Iran. And physics has always been a pet love of mine. I would skip other classes in order to go down and do work on my physics problems, which wasn't easy. You know, I mean, I used to cry if I couldn't get the answer, but I just had to know how things work. And I guess that's really what, you know, the lesson today was about in many aspects, is that we want to know how the universe works. And we're going to find out. So I can hardly wait for the downloads, Mark.
Right, right. Yes, he mentioned stroke, people that have experienced stroke being able to be processed in the unit. I was wondering earlier about this clothing. He said people that are going to be getting processed in these, we're going to ask them to wear some of these clothing with GANs on them, or I don't know if it would be the clothing in the store.
I bought one, it must have been almost a year ago now.
Was that a t-shirt or was that something different?
Oh, I bought one of the ones that completely covers your body, including the head, in case you had.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
The reflective suit, yes.
Yeah, so apparently it has these other uses as well. So it wasn't a waste of money.
Well, I think that's different than the clothing he was talking about, what we were showing earlier with the stripes and things, with the GANs and plasmas impregnated into the material. And he said that before you get processed, you would sort of precondition yourself perhaps in some manner of speaking to maybe be more acceptable to the fields, or in some way, I don't know exactly the reasoning, but he said you'd be asked to wear these clothes prior to being actually processed in a unit.
I think I missed that, but there's a few things I've been missing lately.
Oh, I've missed many, many, many things. We're still learning, and we have a lot of,
Sometimes wonder if I've got two ears or only a half of one.
but you're sounding very well. And of course, we've all been infected in a way and with this virus of knowledge seeking.
Well, in my case, it was due to the guy that was operating in Peru. And he was supposed to be head of the Peruvian Kesh Foundation. But he was a alcoholic and a drug addict. And he never really listened to Mr. Kesh at all. He would listen to everybody else. And he happened to be following this guy in Germany with the Arab name. Bahar, I think his name was. Can't remember the name.
That was before my time, so.
But he didn't wash the caustic soda off after making the gas. Like he should have washed the caustic soda off of the coil. And as such, I decided out of nowhere to give it a try. So I said, well, maybe, I've been having a few problems with my prostate. So I said, well, maybe I should try and see if I can't prevent that. And I remember Paul from Togo saying he had used the GANs in a certain method to help out one of his fellow countrymen who had cancer, and he was getting very good results. So I said, well, maybe I'll start drinking the GANs water that this guy had made in Peru. Turns out he was listening to the fellow in Germany who was also a drug addict and an alcoholic. And essentially, I could feel myself going down. But I never connected much to it until I'd already quit it. And then Mr. Kesh mentioned that don't do that because this substance is very toxic. But it was too late. About 6 months after that, I had my heart attack. Fortunately, I didn't have any pain, so I didn't even know I had the heart attack, or I could have gone and got some treatment for it. And then, of course, that led to me having a stroke. So,
Yes. Well, we all have many little heart attacks. I used to take my father to the heart doctor, and he said we all have many of these little, I guess, cramps in the heart that we're not really aware of over the years. And but I wasn't even aware of that. But the heart doctor was saying this, that it's not that uncommon for us to have many little heart attacks along the way.
My mother used to get mini strokes. And I could tell when she was having one because her facial muscles would just, become very loose and they would sag. And she would have a strange look in her eye. And then a few minutes later, she would be okay again. But she went to see the doctor about it, and they told her she was having mini strokes. So but heart problems run in my family to begin with. I mean, I had a cousin who died of the same condition that I had, which is congenital heart failure. And that was many years ago. My mother finally, although she contracted cancer of the lungs, but what finally killed her was that she had a heart attack, with all the stress concerns. And I had an uncle again, same problem. heart. And I had two cousins with the, again, heart attack. So it's a problem that's congenital in my family.
Well, I know the processing centers will be in Canada as well. I don't know if Alex has any knowledge or any discussions on where they're going to be located, but I would imagine they're going to be around the population centers, probably on, I don't know if the population isn't large in Canada, and they're probably, again, centered like most countries along the coast, maybe east and west, but I'm not sure.
Well, the major population concentration in Canada is around the Great Lakes.
Okay,
And as far as I know, there is already one of these centers in Toronto. Now, Ottawa being the fourth, almost third largest city in Canada, I would assume, hopefully, that we will get one as well. But I was talking with John, I was talking with John, my memory is not as good as it used to be, but I would have probably got this advice from somebody you would know, and I would assume that I was talking with John. So I think pretty well I remember being John. And they can actually do remote treatment using these units. So exactly how they would accomplish that, I'm not sure, Mark, but that's all I can say is that I know that at least somebody told me that. And I assume probably I would ask somebody who might have not had the knowledge to be able to say yes or no. So I'm pretty sure.
yeah.
Yeah. And I've had quite a few conversations with John, so he's not a stranger by any means. A very wonderful, humble human being. They couldn't have
Agree.
picked a better man to head up that project.
Agree. I'm glad he didn't go into making falafels. I think that was one of the businesses he wanted to go into, but he decided to move closer to the Cash Foundation. There's always time for a good falafel.
Yeah. Well, he used to be one of the directors of Searle Aerospace. I don't know. Would you remember that, Mark?
I remember John Searle.
Yeah. Well,
I think his name was John.
John
as
Livin
well.
was one of the directors of the
Mhm.
Searle Aerospace Foundation.
Yes, he used to lose many of his reactors, I think. They would take off and fly into different places, and maybe all over the world, people would find these little discs or something.
I think some of them were found quite a distance away.
Yeah,
Talking about things taking off.
yeah.
I've been watering my plants, my flowers out here on the balcony with, the cup one. And, my daughter bought me the plants. They were very sparse looking when she brought them, but now they're very heavy foliage. And would you believe one of the birds stole one of the plants?
Wants to put it in the nest for the family.
Yeah.
Going to share it. So
This
you're
morning I watered them. There's all kinds of flies around them. Blue bottle flies. They look like they were feeding off the plants. So it's good food.
probably are. I've been getting mad at the mosquitoes lately. They don't seem to leave me alone. And they're so very small. And I know John has had some stories about this, that they just land on his skin and they don't really bite him, but they absorb the energy. But me, they seem to, and they're so small. I was wondering where I'm getting these bites from, but yet these are like mini mosquitoes or something. They're so small, they're almost, you could see through them, but yet they're delivering. But I noticed the CO2 and other things takes the itch right away.
Yeah. Well, I had a bite the other day on the bottom of my foot. Don't know how I managed to get it there, but I took the cup one, sprayed on there, and the itch went away. It was started driving me nuts, like it was on the instep of my foot. And I had to reach down and scratch it. So it's there's many uses of these ganses. And I guess your imagination is your limitation.
And we know no limitations as we're learning.
Well, I got a good imagination.
Yes, and your intellect seems quite sharp to me.
Well, it's, you know, when I go to express things, having to actually force it through this impaired voice is no fun. And that's why I would love to get into one of the units and see what it can do for me. But I'm gonna have to be patient.
And John had alluded to that fact, if someone was processed for a certain, I think he mentioned Parkinson's, that they would then be able to go out and, let's say, process another person right through their fields.
Well, that may be a solution. You know, if I can convince somebody to get down there and come back. But would it be a similar problem, physical problem? Does it have to be, or could it be for any number of different defects?
I don't know. I think different machines will be set, or they'll be programmed to be set, because you can remotely program these units. So many different people can be processed for different problems with the same unit, but it'll all be centrally controlled. And that's another nice feature about this. If you wanted to travel and there's a unit in the area of where you're traveling to, you won't be locked down to your town or to a certain hospital or a certain center. You'd still be able to be moving around the country or the state or wherever you are. As long as there's a unit in the area, you continue your processing, because it'll be programmed for you specifically when you enter it.
Well, I'm being patient. It's not hard. But then again, I don't do it.
But timing is critical, and as he said, the more the world leaders take a step for peace, the more steps the Keshe Foundation will take in introducing new technologies.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hinging. I think if they were all on board now, we'd be really proceeding ahead quickly.
Well, I know in Ontario, the latest round of restrictions, it's getting pretty heavy. And I don't know what all the ceramic cup life is capable of, but I think it's actually a food source, if I'm not mistaken. So with the latest restrictions, I'm saying now, how long before they say you need a passport to go and get food? Is that far off in the future? Because right now,
No, our governor announced the same thing, but again, this may be just a way to prod you into doing something you really didn't want to do.
oh, exactly. And look at, I already got my family doing that. You know, we can't drive you here, can't drive you there. You didn't have your injection. And I'm saying, I'm pretty well isolated from my family. They're still good people. They're still good to me. But again, it's very difficult when they have no respect for you at all, man. It's difficult to accept because I raised those children. I'm very close to them. And
Canada has a lot of beautiful people, and we want to have them continue with us.
They're good people. It's just a matter, they've been conditioned, through, especially, they all think that Keshe is a fraud artist. They think that this science, this technology is buffoonery. And they're all very well educated. They're either working in biochemistry or health from the college, the university. And it seems the deeper you go into university, the more susceptible you are to the program.
Yes, I guess the farther you go up, the more narrow-minded you must be.
Well, what was that what is a PhD? Is a guy who knows more and more about less and less until he finally knows nothing.
That's a good one.
But the key is essentially that my friends are in the millions. And it's too bad I can't get to know them all on a personal basis, but I follow you and John and John from Arizona, John, I guess, from Arizona, and John from Argentina, and all the other guys. And you become my closest companion. But I can't shake your hand or give you a hug. So.
Well, we feel your fields.
Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Well, it was the same with Alex when he made the beads, and Mr. Kesh said that, many of his friends, he lost them, many of his friends, and he spent a year in his kitchen and working on these beads, and the technology in the beads became his friend. And he had a beautiful breakthrough, or many breakthroughs.
Well, the key is essentially when we're fortunate enough to be able to tune in to this new knowledge, we sort of isolate ourselves because the amounts of contradictory programming going on is unbelievable. We spend billions of dollars on that stuff, as you well know. And yes, we do have some good resources as far as economic resources go, but we pale in comparison to their ability to work in that area. But it was very odd. I was in finance. So I started studying the monetary banking financial system. And that pointed me out to just the kind of scamming that mankind was undergoing. It's all a scam. The whole works. And finally, when somebody speaks the truth, they're written off as insane. But that's the way the world has worked up until the current time, and it's now going to change rapidly, and that's good to know. And as long as I've got you guys in there feeding me what I need to know, I can rest comfortably. Are you still there, Mark?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay.
Thank you
You're a
very
very
much.
good listener. I thought maybe.
Yes, no, we thank you. And hopefully with these systems where we can move around the planet, we'll start to meet one another and
Well,
share more.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yes,
Really,
this is going to be beyond the belief of most, but they won't be able to deny it much longer.
Yeah.
Some very exciting times.
No, you're
Oh.
absolutely right on something. I especially like it. Was there
Hello, Gail. Oh, go ahead, excuse me, Daniel.
No, I'm enjoying what you guys are talking about. It's true that, I tune in, and the people that are on Zoom and all these workshops, it's our family now. You can't really, the other part of the population now, I'm devastated because I keep hearing, well, I had to because I would lose my job. And you look at that person and they're in their 20s and you feel so bad. But I always tell them, please make sure if you have problem, please come and talk to me. And they say, yes, I'll come. So
well,
go ahead.
We can take solace in that there's more and more of it. And what's going to be happening from what I can gather from the information that Mr. Cash is giving us, it's going to become very apparent that we're not as crazy as we think we are.
That's good.
And we get some sort of vindication from that. And,
Mhm.
you know, I mean, it'll be nice to regain the respect of my daughters again, because they did have a lot of respect for me at one time. And that they've lost that because of what I've learned and not what I believe. Like, they, well, you can believe what you want. I said, I don't believe anything. I gave that up as a lost cause a long time ago. You know, now I don't want to get involved in arguing about how bad
Yeah,
evil
we
is.
just walk away.
I just shut up. You know, I mean, people, I don't want to destroy my.
And then you come and talk to us. That's good.
Yeah, I enjoy this. I don't get to do it very often because I'm pretty isolated right now. So, thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
And Gail
I
is
do.
originally from Canada, aren't you, Gail?
Yes, yes. I'm a dual citizen with South Africa.
Which city were you born in? Gail?
Coburg in Ontario.
Not far
But
away.
I lived in Castleton and you've never heard of it.
Hamilton. Oh yeah. Well, I had
No,
cousins
Castleton.
Oh, I don't know. I
That-
don't know what that is.
I think there were 300 people but mostly farmers.
Yeah.
And then the next one is Colborne, and
Mhm.
then Coburg, and then I ended up in Kingston. You know, that's kind of like
Yes.
the place you go for university. So quite a few people know that.
all
But
those-
Castleton, no.
All those little towns you mentioned, Gail, they all have signs on the highway.
You know them.
Oh yeah. And my
Oh, wow.
my
You're
wife,
the only one so far.
yeah, my wife was from Windsor.
Okay, now that's down the other way to past Hamilton, I think.
Yeah, but it's always
Um,
401. You know, and
yeah, the 401.
then you end up in down in the you know, in the fruit belt.
Uh-huh, yeah.
I took a drive on highway number 2 down there along in through the growing.
I
area.
used to love highway number 2. Oh,
Absolutely gorgeous, you know.
yeah. But
And-
my favorite places are up north. You know, we used to go to Algonquin. My father made sure he would take us every year to a spot, and Algonquin Park was one. And then in the States, we went to Lake Placid and, you know, along the eastern seaboard. Beautiful, beautiful trip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So,
no man's concerned with, you know, Algonquin Park, of course.
oh yeah, well, they used to have programs, you know, and you would go and sit and watch the programs for the whole campsite, whole camping. Participants would come and they were really good. It was beautiful. And you could see the northern lights, you know, they always made a point of going at the right time. So I missed that part.
Well,
I sort of got sidetracked, but it's very interesting.
yeah.
I'm sorry
they're-
to take it away, Mark.
No problem.
shouldn't
No,
have
it's
done-
fine. We're all part of a family and this is what families do.
Yes,
And,
it is.
you know, there may be a line, Daniel, to get into these units because a lot of the world leaders are waiting to be processed themselves. and
Aha,
Many of the richest people on the planet.
Yes,
So
that was my question, Mark.
it's
I
going
was
to be
gonna say, I think,
beautiful. Yep. Go ahead, Gail.
do you think that they will have the World Peace Treaty in their hand before that person can get in? What a good way to get peace.
Yes, and I think it's going to elevate us as well to see the world leaders changing their tact entirely and maybe expressing their sorrow for some of the things, but hopefully there'll be no punishment and there'll be no jail time and there'll just be elevation of the souls.
No,
Even-
I like what
Yeah, I
you
do
said.
try to remind myself to please, if I'm really annoyed with, you know, some of the issues, I try my best to switch off my irritation and do that thing about sending from my soul, you know?
Yes, yes, yes. Dan wanted to share a small video from the, or something, a clarification about the picture at 2:45 of the 398th Knowledge Seekers Workshop. Can Dan?
Be interested in restating her question so I could understand, I could answer it properly.
Alex, I'm used to seeing, you know, the words gravitational and magnetical. And then when you put, I've noticed that I'm having problems trying to distinguish where my point of view is. I sometimes get that mixed up. So before the cups, there was some part about the pulling, pushing, you know, pulling slash pushing, and then plus gravitational, that kind of thing.
And I understand that, and I expected that. That is a serious confusion in the world of physics. And the reason for it is because physics has been taught as a one-way street. And in the plasma science, it's a two-way street. So what that means is that...
Could you, Alex, could you just restate her question? I think I missed it, but it sounds like you have it. Could you restate it in what she's actually asking you?
So the question is the relationship of the magnetical to gravitational field forces and the relationship of that to the point of view.
Okay.
Is that correct, Gail?
Yes, and it's I think it's just a matter of the way the word changing, that I didn't pick it up the way I should have. So
no, it's a very difficult concept, this came up at a couple of weeks back because the field forces of the magnetical gravitational are identical. It just depends on your point of view, is it coming or going? But at the core of the understanding between the magnetical and gravitational, if you put two magnets together and they're of the same pole, they will repel. But at some point in time, they stop repelling. What is the force that stops them from repelling? Well, that would be the attraction force. So from the initiation of the movement, there is more repulsion than there is attraction. At the end of the movement, the repulsion and attraction are balanced. If there's an external force that adds to the attraction, then that gap will diminish. In other words, there will be more of an attraction than a repulsion. So then these two fields will be coming together. So our point in this whole thing is that of an observer, but we are also participants. So in other words, what we've had the luxury of being able to do is look at the physical manifestation of the interaction between the sun and the earth. The fact of the matter is that the sun is vastly larger than the earth. Similarly, as the proton is 1,849 times larger than the electron. So the incorrectness of comparing fields is when you compare two fields of the same strength, then there is a position where they are stationary. But even if you look at the moon, which is only showing you one side all the time, so although the moon appears to be stationary, so there's a dark side of the moon and a lit side of the moon. The thing is, on the boundary of the moon, there is a wobble. So at the boundary, there is a, shall we say, a transition from day to night and that kind of thing. But overall, the moon itself is rotating through a spiral around the Earth. So the reason I say it's a spiral is because the Earth is rotating around the sun and it too is going around the spiral. So the moon is following that trajectory. So you could say, from your point of view, that the moon is not rotating, but in fact it is. So therefore, the rotation is on a different axis. So there's an X, Y, and Z axis. But if you're observing those three, then you're none of those three. You can't be those three and be looking at those three. And this is the basis of the discussion now, because as we start to elaborate on the two-way functionality, we have to understand that this two-way attribute is there all the time. So if something is moving, it has not abandoned its maggrav position. It has moved its position with respect to other maggravs. So there's an energy of binding to create the maggrav. There's an energy of flowing between the plasma fields. And in order for us to understand the fundamentals of creation, so that is the initial binding. But where does that energy come from? So that energy is coming from other plasma fields. So in effect, the energy for our plasma field, which is our body, our physical body, is a total of all the various energies that are going through all the various PM ticks in the universe. And all of these various energies have a different field strength, which we have been able to list in a periodic table of elements. The problem with that periodic table of elements is that it's elementary, and that's not the way the universe works. So we are very skillful at tearing things apart, and by looking at them individually, we don't see the field interaction. And then we try and apply that to our, not only our physicality, but our physiology and our biology and our psychology and our sociology. And so all of these limitations of the physics is carried forward into all of these other studies. And then we threw in an educational system which limits your progress year by year. And they only teach you what they want you to know. And frankly, regardless of which education I had as a youngster, my education started way after I was an adult. And what that brought that to me was the fact that I had cancer in my family. So my knowledge became an existential crisis. And we have one political party in Canada that says the most important thing in our mind is global warming. Well, when you have an existential crisis where you are faced with a life and death matter, whether you're a long hauler or you have a virus or you have the loss of a job related to the pandemic, and you have to pay your mortgage and you have to feed your family. These are all existential crises, which are far more relevant to your day-to-day life than climate change, which has to do with, shall we say, decades of change. And in other words, if you compare the two, if you can't pay your rent tomorrow, I don't think you worry about climate change in the year 2050. So we are enjoying our luxury of being in academia and forgetting that our social structure is physically, financially, and morally bankrupt. And you cannot change that from the physical up, because the physical is a physical manifestation of the plasmatic substructure. And so it is the pushing and the pulling of the magnetical and gravitational field forces in the plasmatic substructure, which eventually manifests itself into physicality, but not necessarily. It could manifest into a plasmatic reality. And it is at that level, that higher level, what we call transcendence, to that higher level, that we can do two things. One, we can heal more rapidly, and two, we can learn more rapidly. This is the knowledge of connection, or knowing by connection. Is that better for you, Gail?
It's part of it. But I think some of the problem I'm having is with the words. You know, we've switched it from what we were learning before into something more so that we're not stuck with just the words of gravitational and magnetical kind of thing.
Okay, if I think I know what your question is, so let me try again. The basic rule is the higher strength feeds the weaker strength.
Yes.
Well, who feeds the higher strength?
The weak.
Well, if you say no, it would have to be a higher strength.
I mean, eventually, maybe I should say.
No, but what I'm saying is, if the higher strength is feeding you, then that higher strength that is feeding you is magnetical. You see, the point of all this, on the periodic table of elements, the masses, as it's described of everything, has a constancy. And there's no rule that says all the energy states are at the same level. Likewise, there's no rule that says all the magnetical energy fields are at the same level, or all the gravitational fields at the same level. What we're talking about is relationships, comparative relationships. And this discusses not only the direction of flow, but the strength of the flow. So the higher strength feeds the lower strength.
Yeah. Okay. I think we've also made it very simple with our infinity loop. And I still have that picture constantly.
That is the
in my...
simplest, isn't it? That is the simplest.
It's very simple.
But you know, in this slide that I hope you're seeing at this point of view, so if we look at the Earth and say, well, the Earth is, the gravity comes from the Earth, and we know that that's a misnomer. But that's looking at it from the Earth's point of view, because in order for the Earth to be constructed, it has to attract energy, and that attraction of the energy is gravitational. But if we were looking at it from the Earth's point of view, then we would not be able to travel on the Earth. We would in fact be a part of the Earth. All right, and that is not the way we operate. We have our own gravitational point. So our body is gravitational on the inside, and what we do with our body is projecting out. That's our magnetical force, and our magnetical force interacts with other things. And if that other thing is repelling, then we create a barrier. If that other thing is attracting, then we interact. So all the people on this panel today are interacting regardless of what their intention is, because they are here. And that's one of the beauties of being in the presence of that, is because then you get a direct experience. What I'm alluding to is saying, you know that you can listen to music and have a benefit from listening to the music, but you're still going to pay a fortune to go to a musical concert, because there is an intangible benefit from being at the live event that you don't get from being in a recorded event. And this is the energy that is absorbed by you from a different dimension. And that dimension is not visible. This is the part that physics discounts. So you can't take zinc and copper and bash them together. You can do a chemical reaction, or you can do a plasmatic reaction, but you know, physically you have limitations. And so that's why we're introducing the other subjects. So the whole purpose of today's class is to highlight these limitations and understand the difference between these sciences is their singular viewpoint, not understanding the interaction, the dual viewpoint, and the unlimitations of the plasma science. And the big challenge for the plasma science is when scientists dispute that. But the thing is, you have to have some kind of proof to dispute that. And the only thing that they can dispute it with is theories, which have in themselves been disputed. So we now have put those to rest, and we look forward to incorporating the plasma science, not only the way it should be on this planet, but the way we were born with. Because when you look at the rest of the universe is benevolent, peaceful, and energy is abundant. Is that better, Gail?
Yes, it's coming much better.
You are not alone. You are not alone in this problem. I mean, if you've been, trained in science for 20 or 30 years, this is a hard thing to let go. But I'll tell you what, if you get hit with some kind of existential crisis, you start grasping at straws. And when those straws come true and get you out of that existential crisis, then you have to look in the mirror and say, what have I been doing for 30 years? And frankly, I had to say that at the age of 40, and it was quite a shock. But once I found the answer, and I overcame the resistance to applying what I learned, then all of a sudden life became easier. And as I tried to impart that to other people, and especially my friends, then I found a different kind of resistance. And I said, well, you were resisting me before, and now you're resisting me again. And I don't understand that. And this is, Daniel was talking about that earlier in today's meeting. And so until we get to that crisis point, we may not be able to do this transition. Well, the plasma science is allowing us to gracefully cross over that barrier. And that is one of the real beauties of this. And we are just on the verge of really, really enjoying this, because we're not the only ones who want peace and harmony on this planet. There are 7 billion of us who do, whether we can talk about it freely or not. That is the truth coming from the soul. Thanks a lot, Gail. That was a great question.
Thank you, Alex. I might have to jump out because it looks like they're going to turn off the electricity again. Sometimes they're polite and they'll flash the light a few times, and then you've got to get a light.
Well, this is what happens when you're in the year, what is it, 1492?
1492.
Yeah, isn't that when Christopher Columbus discovered America? Yeah, well, one of these days, there'll be some new technology that you can have energy like all day.
I want to have hanging light bulbs that have no wires. Thank you.
You have to recover the energy that Egypt had with the pyramids. They had electric energy all over Africa.
All over Africa.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
And America also, with the pyramids, they provided electricity. But
So let's put
all
in-
this has been covered up.
Well, I wonder if we have to put in a pyramid down here, maybe.
Well, it's not
Okay.
necessary. It covers the whole place. Tesla
I'm
wanted to
joking a little, but
Tesla wanted to give us electricity through the air that covered the whole world in 1890. But JP
Yeah.
Morgan didn't allow him to.
and made himself very rich.
A couple of things. I just wanted to ask if there's anyone here with us for the first time, if they'd like to state their name and their location. I wanted to put that out. And also, Leanna, I made a request for your contact in Oklahoma. We haven't gotten any responses yet, but perhaps you'd like to restate it for us. So first, is there anyone here for the first time who'd like to tell us who they are and where they're from? And then Leanna, if you can hear me, you could open your mic and state your problem. And let's see if we can find a solution for you.
Hi, thank you so much for thinking of my family. Actually, they got their plasma water today.
Oh, great.
I ended up
Yeah,
having to send 2 packages, and the husband is gonna come home. They're gonna let him come home from the hospital. So they're gonna do protocol with him. Doctors gave him steroids for like a really bad pneumonia, or they're giving him that, I guess, and hopefully he'll get to come home tomorrow. And they just started it today. So God is good. So thankful.
so one package got stuck, but the other went through. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, I paid for 2-day shipping with special handling, and then it's like on the 3rd day, it was still at my local post office. It went to Honolulu, and then it came back, and then and then finally it made it to them this morning. So it got delivered on a Sunday. So that was pretty cool.
That's great. That's
There's
great.
another one coming. So now they'll get to help their neighbors or somebody else, you know?
Yes, hopefully we'll have a follow-up report as well.
Oh, I'll ask them once they feel better. I didn't even like tell them, I want to hear your testimonial. I'm just like, okay, I'm sending the stuff. You're
Great.
going to be okay.
Great.
So
We're glad it's
yeah, so
alive.
thank
That
you
was
for
our
asking
wishes.
me.
They should
Thank
keep
you.
up
I
with the
appreciate all
treatment.
the prayers. Yeah, thank you guys. And thank you, Alex, for showing up every week, and everybody. Thank you, Dr. Kesh, and everybody. Thanks, y'all.
Mark, I'm just going to take this interlude to thank everybody for being here and for allowing me to continue with these presentations. I really hope that you're enjoying them. I do hope they're contributing to the knowledge in a most useful way. And I'm honored that the North American Corona team meeting has turned into the North American International team meeting. Because we are all universal patriots. So I'm going to sign off with this and pass it over to you, Mark. Thank you so much.
And thank you again, and to all the team.
A quick question. In normal day, working day, I consume more or less 400 kilocalories. Today, I consume only 6, let's say 7 kilocalories. I'm doing nothing. This energy transfer, because I not want to say consuming by physicality. This transfer of energy, I ask myself, how much energy consuming or transfer my soul? It's, let's say, rhetoric question, but it's interesting like a question. How much energy consuming the soul, transferring the energy? You know, when it's saying I eating,
Yeah.
I don't know what kilocalorie, I consuming, I burning, I don't know what kilocalorie.
Well, we
What
know
happened?
all of us are absorbing about 80% of the energy through what we breathe, through our skin, from the fields of the universe. So we all know we're all around in the area of 20% short. And that what causes us to consume or to take from another entity to maintain our structure.
Measurement in the physicality, no? I
I'm not
burning,
sure. How
I
would you
transferring.
how do you know that you're consuming 4,000 and today you only consume 6?
With this browser, with this watch, counting my
Okay.
heartbeat, sleeping time during the day, how many kilometers today I walking or making. It's empiric measurement, but it's interesting if I don't consuming so many, doing nothing, staying in the bed all the time, all the day,
Uh-huh.
more or less.
Well, you were talking about absorbing like a plant earlier in the chat, and I know Mr. Kesh mentioned the cup of man. The 2 cups, you can spray as much as you like of cup number 1 of the cup of man on the head, and as much as you like of cup number 2 of the cup of man on the feet. And this will create some way to absorb more fields like a plant. You'll be creating a field around you. I just thought I'd add that.
I living in this field,
Yes.
which means I have the cups surround me.
Okay.
I showing where I take the GANs and the reactors. It's interesting because I remember the balancing between magnetic and gravitational is always constant. One is increasing one, the other, let's say, decreasing, but always it's one constant. Let's say 1G in all the places. Always the balance. When you are eating or not eating, breathing or not breathing, making the in some place, in some way, you're taking the energy, you're giving the energy in one manner or the other, in the emotion, in the action, in the physical way, in the emotional level, in soul level, thinking. Sometimes I spread more energy doing nothing but thinking instead of sometimes I working a lot, but I don't thinking, let's say. Conservation of energy.
Yes, the brain uses much more energy than the physical work, which would be just the opposite of what most of us think. If you work hard, you're going to consume more energy, but your brain is always working. This control center seems to be always processing. So a tremendous amount of energy gets used in the brain as opposed to the physicality working.